the 7 wars, I looked into them. It's very circumstantial on the 7. This is the one where he has the most actual impact, which is the Gaza ceasefire. So I'm interested in hearing more about it from your research, Aiden. But
let's get into it. So this is a huge development in the Gaza-Israel situation. What's been happening?
It's a ceasefire deal that is the potential end to this war, right? And I wanted to recap a little bit of the past month and a little bit in the past year. So the war has been going on since October 7th of a couple years ago. In that time, Israel has killed 68,000 people in Gaza, mostly civilians. And over this time, many of people have called for a stop to this violence, right? Over the course of this 2 years. And a lot of people or organizations like Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International have called it a genocide. And then most recently, a UN Commission of Inquiry in September of this year released the first definitive statement from the UN calling it a genocide as well. I would say at a personal level, the vibes in the past 6 months to a year, just reading news and like seeing people's broader opinions about this, I think as this has dragged on, there's been a pretty distinct turn in terms of the collective view of Israel having gone too far. It feels different than it was like a year ago or a year and a half ago when you look at like the percentage of people who are saying that. And I think this pressure and this context of more and more countries and people feeling that way is sort of building up to the moment in the past month and a half that we're in now. So the big developments that have like led to this ceasefire specifically, on September 9th, Israel launches a strike in Qatar, targeting some Hamas leadership that they are currently negotiating with. There's an ongoing
worked in Iran.
there's an ongoing negotiation between Hamas and Israel to sort of figure things out for the future, right? And as they're negotiating with them, they attack them in Qatar, the same representation.
Again, I think what you said before about the opinion shifting is important as context for this, because Israel has become more and more isolated geopolitically on its one major ally, the United States. And the United States is allied with Qatar. So this strike is like, I don't remember the exact thing, but Trump himself, who's been a pretty pro-Israel guy and still is, was like pretty furious publicly about this attack in Qatar because it crossed a line of, we're the only ones on your side and you just crossed the barrier.
Absolutely. It's crossing a significant line. And
it's like if we went to Vox's headquarters and threw bricks through the windows.
I did that yesterday, but only just to keep them on their chest.
And then you called for peace.
And then I called for peace. Okay. And I asked them to raise our ad rate.
And then in reaction to this, I imagine it was getting organized or spoken about prior to this as well, a block of Arab countries, including places like Egypt, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar, present a peace plan to the US in New York ahead of the UN General Assembly that happened in September. And the US is like, all right, this looks good. This is our chance to create a ceasefire or potentially end the war. Let's bring this to the Israelis in New York. And they go through all of these negotiations and they come out with this like 20-point plan that Israel agrees to, that admittedly at first the Arab countries aren't happy with. But after these negotiations play out, one more thing happens, which is there's a public photo shoot with Netanyahu in the White House where Trump gets him to phone Qatar in front of the media and apologize for the strike.
Really?
In this sort of, the pictures are pretty crazy, honestly. And
he's kind of like sulking.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Netanyahu doesn't look happy in the photo.
Netanyahu looks like a yelled at child, to be honest. I mean, can I say one thing about the UN? Because you mentioned the UN. I think that was a pretty key moment. That UN meeting, because that was like a public display of how isolated they had become. When Netanyahu got up there to speak and talk about...
Yeah, there's two things happening in tandem at that UN assembly, right? When Netanyahu goes up to speak, almost all of the room just walks out of the building, right? Yeah. Symbolically, like, we will not tolerate Israel any longer. And then the other big thing that happened was France, Canada, the UK, Australia, Belgium, and a few other countries recognized Palestinian statehood for the first time publicly, which is this gigantic public recognition of Israel becoming increasingly isolated on the world stage, right?
These are major economies. Like almost all the major economies of the world were.
And at this point, right, Israel really has only the U.S. as a significant player on its side, albeit the U.S. is the party with the most sway and influence over which direction like Israel goes on these things. And with this deal that they had negotiated with Israel at the time, they agreed to this 20-point ceasefire, which is seen broadly as something that favors Israel more than the Gazans and Hamas.
I mean, I hadn't seen this before. It's like a parent scolding a child.
Yeah.
They like gave Netanyahu fucking corded phone and make him read a script
in front of the public, in front of the cameras.
That's insane.
It was crazy.
Man.
There's a note here in that there's kind of a theory that Israel agreed to this 20-point plan because they didn't think Hamas would agree to a lot of the details of it. Like the idea that there's aspects of this that Israel wasn't super happy or Netanyahu isn't super happy with, but it was so, from their perspective, so unlikely Hamas would agree to the stipulations around disarmament and no longer governing the Gaza Strip.
Point 13, Hamas cannot have any role in the governance of Gaza in any form, and they have to shut down all military. And like they need to agree to this for this ceasefire to hold.
But Hamas follows up and does agree. So this begins to take shape in a reaction to both sides agreeing to this and Trump, announcing that this is officially agreed upon. This was as of Sunday this week. Hamas releases the 20 remaining live hostages that they have to the Israelis. And then there's a prisoner exchange that also happened earlier this week of about 2,000 Palestinian prisoners and detainees being released back to Gaza. And then the other beginning stipulations of this are aid is allowed to flow freely in and out of Gaza again. There's going to be increased economic support to Gaza to help them rebuild. Hamas officials have an opportunity to decide whether or not they're going to stay or leave and set up residence in other countries. Gazans broadly are free to return to their cities and towns where they used to live in. You're seeing a lot of pictures right now, right? People walking long distances back to their homes that are now destroyed from what happened. And
can I two other ones I thought were interesting in this 20-point plan. One is no one will be forced to leave Gaza, which sounds obvious, but months ago, Trump had been floating this idea of moving Gazans to a different country or something. And so that is baked into this peace plan that is not happening. And then point 16 is that Israel will not occupy or annex Gaza. So it's a very explicit, they have to leave.
Yeah. And I want to come back to that specific point and also a few other of these. Two other things that has happened over the course of the weekend is Trump flew to Israel, makes a speech, and then Trump goes to Egypt for this Gaza Peace Summit where they're with a bunch of other countries from around the world showing their approval for this agreement, announcing what the future is going to be like and how this plan is going to play out. But I think one important thing is that Trump, in the buildup to this or around these things, has said that he's saying the war is over. But Netanyahu has not said that at any point. Also, at this Egypt summit, Israel wasn't there. Israel didn't go, and neither was Hamas or any form of Palestinian representation from what I saw. So it's weird to have this giant summit around this deal, but not have either party present and just have it be all the other countries that help negotiate said deal. So where does this leave things right now, right? There is absolutely an immediate sense of relief from whether or not you're Palestinian or Israeli for maybe different reasons, a relief of just the violence being over, right? For Gazans to no longer be under attack in this war and that for presumably this genocide to be over, you can you can safely return home.
I mean, aid is now allowed to flow in.
Aid can flow in. There's some relief there no matter what. But now we're at the rest of this where the beginning stages of this plan are being put into place and Israel is falling back their lines of occupation on the Gazan territory, but the territory is still currently occupied. And this 20-point plan has a bunch of stipulations of the follow-through, both on Israel's end and Hamas's end, that need to be continued to be followed through with. And Netanyahu's lack of recognition of the war being over sort of indicates that Israel might just start this up again, because there have been previous ceasefire agreements where Israel agreed to a ceasefire for a period of time, and this just launched a missile and then continued.
Yeah, I mean, I want to say, the geopolitical situation is such that it would be tougher for them to break it than they have in the past.
Exactly.
Because the reason they negotiated to begin with is because they're so isolated. They're dependent on the United States. The United States finally stopped backing them, or at least pushed them into doing something.
Yeah.
And now they don't have the hostages as I don't want to use the word excuse, but as a cause.
It can't be we have to go save our citizens.
If there's no more hostages they can't begin rebombing Gaza and try to, it just further isolates them. And it would be violation of what is a publicly recognized a positive peace deal.
There's also weird, I mean, maybe just weird from my perspective of reading it, stipulations in the plan. So point 9, Gaza will be governed under the temporary transitional governance of a technocratic, apolitical Palestinian committee responsible for delivering the day-to-day running of public services and municipalities for the people in Gaza. And then one of the people that it says who's going to assist with this is Tony Blair, the former prime minister of the UK. What I have been reading, because there's so many different ideas and opinions and sources, and even the way this was agreed to feels like there may not be a follow through or a full agreement with all the aspects of this plan. It feels like there's a lot of details that won't be committed to.
If there's one thing the Palestinian region has needed, it's more British influence. We need to bring that back. Okay.
Everything was so good.
Well, they really they drew the borders well. They set this all up well. We need to bring Tony Blair back.
Well, actually, Tony, what you might not be aware is Tony Blair he's knighted. He's a sir. So we actually need to do another crusade.
He's like, I'm gonna fix this situation just like I fixed the NHS.
We're gonna send him, Sir Patrick Stewart, Sir Elton John. We're gonna send a new crusade over
as many British people as we can,
peaceful knights
to solve Middle East problems. I do want to say, you talked about the tenuousness of this deal. It's only been a few days, or a day 4 or 5 or something like this, and Israel is already threatening to re-block aid because they did not get the bodies of the deceased hostages.
Which they're supposed to get from my
They are supposed to get, and I guess they've been trickling out. They got 4 additional deceased ones today, but they haven't got them all, so they're threatening to cut the aid. So, I mean, it's on a razor's edge of like...
Yeah, and I feel like the primary thing maintaining this is just the U.S.'s pressure and influence. The fact that they have finally caved to like a small degree and pressured for this deal to be the case. That's like the biggest thing that makes this different from anything in the past, but it's still a question of whether or not it will hold together. Just because the 20-point plan says the occupation is supposed to end doesn't mean that it's going to end. And then one thing I was thinking about is even if it did, right?
Yeah.
None of this has anything to do with the West Bank. The West Bank's not mentioned at all. The settlements in the West Bank aren't mentioned at all.
Yeah.
There's a whole nother section of this issue that even if everything in this agreement was fulfilled perfectly, right?
Yeah.
It's not like Israel-Palestine as the issue is like solved, right? Palestinian liberation.
Of the worst. Yeah.
It all feels so precarious. That was what I walked away with. It feels confusing, precarious, and I'm happy that the violence is over in the short term, but is this something that is followed through with?
So that's what I want to say is like, obviously I've been a bit of a critic of Donald Trump for a lot of episodes and a lot of Big A clips, but if this held, let's say through a full year of next year, it would only be because of he has to keep his attention on this thing. Like it would require Donald Trump to actually continually think about this, put pressure on it. If he turns his attention and gaze somewhere else and stops caring,
that's Tony's job.
So if he did it, I would actually say that is more than what Obama did and could be earned. Like I wouldn't mind him getting the Peace Prize for that. This is going to take significant focus.
Imagine Tony Blair gets the Nobel Peace Prize next year.
That would be fucking crazy.
Oh, that's so funny.
So what you're saying, I think a critique I've seen pop up a lot is Trump has this way of doing business is he announces a change that he sees himself as involved in. And to his credit, he is involved here, right? And then he makes it very grandiose. He's like, the war is over. It's one of the great moments in civilization.
He said he ended 3,000 years of war in the Middle East.
Yeah.
He's like,
but he has a history of
on day one, he said that.
Of doing something or saying something like that, and then kind of moving on and going to the next issue or the next toy and leaving the follow through and the details to others, right?
Yeah.
And I think with a situation like this, that seems like an approach that isn't going to be sustainable. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know. I agree with you. It seems tenuous. It seems like there's a lot of things that could break it. Any small action, even by an individual actor, could domino effect, could escalate. I mean, anything could cause someone to feel like they don't need to do their up end of the bargain and then escalate and then goes back and like it.
Okay, so I have a question to follow up on this. I feel like you guys follow this.